bishops, fathers, sisters, and brothers. At the very outset, I would like to thank the organizers, particularly Father Lawrence, for inviting me to present this paper. Thank you. Highlighting the synodal path trodden by the Church, Orman Rush comments, in maintaining the unity of faith, the Church learned early in its history, community, in council, in synod, just as the coming of the Spirit at Pentecost was experienced when they were all together. At the very outset, I would like to state that papal monarchy or papal supremacy appears to be an intransigent contradiction, especially when it seeks to envelop the synodal path. For one is led to think that monarchy or supremacy necessarily mean that there is a very little of dialogue, as it often echoes the famed Justinian code, Suprema lex regis voluntas. Papal supremacy is the doctrine of the Catholic Church that seeks to elucidate the unique role of the Pope as the vicar of Christ and successor of Peter in exercising his pastoral ministry, for which he enjoys by divine institution supreme, full, immediate, and universal power in the care of souls. This doctrine has multifarious implications. One of them is its relation with the states, as some of them were confessional, especially during the medieval times, when the state and church formed one organism, reductio ad unum, and with the other churches, especially with the Orthodox churches. The paper tries to indicate the paths trodden by some popes from the 6th to the 14th centuries and their collaborators in exercising synodality in the midst of their rise to glory and even in their eventual downfall. Rise of Roman See in the ancient epoch. The word primacy was originally derived from the Latin word primus, meaning first, which automatically implies that there are others. Hence, the Bishop of Rome was accepted as primus inter pares, first among equal local bishops. Papal primacy or supremacy is often linked to the teaching of giving preeminent position to the Bishop of Rome in the early Christianity, as it is believed in a pentarchy or communion of churches. This is how the Roman Church and its bishops were viewed in the early church. There are scholars who say that the key was given to the person of Peter, that is not continued in his successors. Up to the year 107 AD, we are not sure of mon episcopate, and therefore who succeeded whom. While that is the case, how can we affirm the apostolic succession of Roman bishops? However, one can notice a turn of events from the 2nd century when the church accepted the primacy of Rome. There are many reasons as to why the papacy grew in strength after the fall of Rome, generally thought to be after 476 AD, and remained in power until Reformation. There are reasons, I am not going into that. Okay. Reiterating the decisive role played by popes in defending the people and especially providing the leadership roles, in the western part of the empire, Bill Meyer writes, the two popes, both deserving the surname Great, Leo the Great and Gregory the Great, notably increased the prestige of the papacy and secured it for the future. The popes became the sole defenders of the sorely afflicted population of Italy. By defending the Western civilization and obtaining truce from the invading armies, the bishops of Rome attempted to fill the political void created by the Byzantine emperors. During this the period of the primacy of the Roman Church was generally recognized in the East as well as in the West. The Councils of Constantinople in 381 and Chalcedon in 451 expressly stated that its bishops was to have precedence only after the Bishop of Rome. During the Christological controversies in the East and the soteriological disputes in the West, the Roman See had spoken authoritatively and its delegates were given place of honor in the general councils. Papal monarchy in the medieval epoch. Certainly during the early medieval centuries, popes such as Leo the Great, Nicholas the First had embodied a strong form of papal primacy, acting as Saint Peter's successors in far-reaching ways, such as when Leo intervened in the Christological debates at the Council of Chalcedon, his famous Tomus ad Flavianum. It was the basis for the council. Or when Nicholas confronted the rulers of Constantinople during the Phocian Schism, Gregory the Great was mindful equally of the supreme authority claimed by the Roman bishopric and of the need to keep that claim in proper perspective. Emergence of papal states. When Astolph threatened to incorporate Rome with his kingdom, Pope Zachary sought the protection of Pepin the Short, the mayor of the place and the father of Charlemagne, and in return for this, he asked the Pope to crown Pepin and his sons as kings of France. That was the beginning of the collaboration. That was the first step towards the creation of Western Empire and a new. When Astolph threatened to incorporate Rome with his kingdom, Pope Zachary sought the protection of Pepin the Short, the mayor of the place and the father of Charlemagne, and in return for this, he asked the Pope to crown Pepin and his sons as kings of France. That was the beginning of the collaboration. That was the first step towards the creation of Western Empire and a new political system of Europe, which the Pope and the German Emperor at the head. Reign of Gregory the Seventh. With Gregory the Seventh, the medieval conception of the papacy became fully shaped. Later popes exceeded him in effective power, but they had no need to extend his statement of the papal claims. Gregory the Seventh was to claim not merely supreme spiritual, but a supreme temporal power, to declare an emperor even deposed, and to plunge Germany and Italy into war to enforce his will. He was a staunch defender of papal primacy, and he was known for his Dictatus Papae, which was promulgated during the London Synod in 1075, a high point of papal monarchy. During the High Middle Ages, popes dressed and in some ways acted like worldly rulers, setting armies in motion, defending church offices and property, offering judgment in disputes. Plenitude of potestatis, fullness of power. The high point of papal monarchy is found in the pontificate of medieval Pope Innocent III. With him, a truly historic view of the papacy emerged. As a pope, he had claimed for himself the plenitude of potestatis, the fullness of authority and power. Thus, for him, sovereignty and primacy came to denote the same thing. The papacy for him was the source of all power, both spiritual and temporal. He held that secular sovereignty was essentially derived from the church, and that the emperor and kings are merely vicars of the pope. The power and the right of the pope to rule came directly from God. Going further in the same direction, we see the exercise of the same authority by Boniface VIII. We have to understand the promulgation of the bull Unam Sanctam, which claimed that the papal power was divine in origin and was superior to and above any other power in the world. Papacy in crisis. Religion and state were two distinct power centers. Papacy wanted to enhance and exalt the spiritual realm and place above the temporal. Papacy could not subjugate the temporal, and the efforts to subjugate it would always land up in conflicts and quarrels, which were common. The struggles between Boniface VIII and Philip the Fair of France is an example of that struggle. It was at this time one could hear the voice of separating the state from the church. Theologians came out with the theories to defend such ideas. They were of the opinion that the church is not a clerical institute. It belongs to all. France and Spain gained autonomy over the church and began to control the church. Papacy tried to maintain its position by repressive methods like taxation, excommunication, and inquisition. This led to violent conflict between church and state. The 14th and 15th centuries also stand as period of crisis in the history of papacy. This was the time of conciliarism, when the leading scholars like Marsilius of Padua, William of Ockham, John of Paris, etc., were contemplating whether the Pope could be subjugated or whether his powers could be shared. Basing their arguments on Decretum Gratiani and Hugh of Chartres, they spoke about the authority in the church is collegial, using the analogy of head and members. Synodality during the rise of papacy. The councils were normally occasioned by controversies and crises. For instance, the councils held in North Africa during the time of Cyprian was to deal with the effects of persecution, and the Ecumenical Council of Middle Ages with a view to reform. The exact number, dates, and activities of the early synods held under Pope Damasus I are in controversy. He was forceful opponent of Arianism and other forms of heresy. In this, he enjoyed the support of Peter of Alexandria. He deposed 2 Arian bishops in Illyricum in 369. General synods were formally called and confirmed by the emperors, kings, and princes. These were generally approved by the Pope during the time of feudalism. The Pope alone has the right to summon and confirm synods, a right until then exercised by the Frankish king. Bishops accused before the local synods have the right to appeal to the Pope. The great councils of Middle Ages grew out of the synods held by the reforming popes. Saint Gregory VII invited French and northern Italian bishops of Rome in 1075, and soon abbots, proxies of cathedral chapters, and even laymen began to take their place among the bishops. There were also laymen participating in the synod. Pope Gregory VII had declared in Dictatus Papae number 16 that no synod shall be called a general synod without his order. The attempts of Frederick Barbarossa to assert his right to convoke the synod of Pavia in 1160 failed miserably. The 12th century saw the start of series of general councils, Lateran councils, to implement reform. Now these councils, which would come to the to be regarded as ecumenical in the West were called by the Pope rather than by the Emperor. The synods were either provincial, local, or diocesan. Sometimes the priors and abbots were invited to participate. In the 14th century, they were usually held once or twice a year, and such synods would last for 3 days. In the spirit of synodal reform, we can also recognize the role played by the general chapters, provincial chapters of religious congregations, which were celebrated with a view to bring reform in the church.
5 minutes.
Okay.
5 minutes more.
Okay, we'll conclude it. Okay. It is also to be borne in mind that the popes did not enjoy the supremacy without constant competition and criticism. Challenging the power of the popes, the secular powers, emperors and kings and princes, would often provide an interpretation of history prioritizing the power of secular rulers as God's agents. Synods were normal ways of deciding about the important matters in the church, whether it is a dogmatic issue or a disciplinary issue. The accepted standard way of dealing with the issue is through synods. London synods were often celebrated for these purposes. Though there were synods that dealt with the heresies and disciplinary aspects of the church, there were synods that were celebrated for trivial matters. Prior to 1075, before the publication of Dictatus Papae, the synods were convoked by the rulers, either directly or through their influence. Frequently, one could notice the hands of ruler in the deliberation of the synods. At the threat of the enemies of Leo III in Rome, there's some information which might be of some interest. At the threat of the enemies of Leo III in Rome, who wanted to cut his tongue and pluck out his eyes, he fled to Paderborn, where Emperor Charlemagne was residing. The emperor brought him back to Rome and convoked a synod in 799, where the Roman nobility was made to promise that they would thereafter respect Bishop of Rome, and brought out that famous dictum, prima sedes a nemine judicatur. Although some synods were convoked by laymen, the vast majority of laymen did not know anything that happened at that time, because during the Middle Ages, the faithful were generally illiterate and ignorant. Under the influence of Duke of Spoleto, who supported Stephen VI in the papal election, a synod was convoked by the Pope in 896 to try the deceased Pope Formasus, who was earlier supported by Duke of Carinthia, who was at war with the Duke of Spoleto. This abominable incident in the history of the church was known as the Cadaver Synod. This, in fact, is the high point of feudalism. Pope John XII plotted against the Emperor Otto I, who returned to Rome in the fall of 963 and called a synod that deposed John and replaced him with Leo VIII. When Emperor Henry III visited Italy in 1045, a schism had broken out with 3 claimants to the papacy. On his own authority, Henry called a synod at Sutri in 1046, where he sat in judgment on the popes and declared the 3 unworthy, and he proposed his own candidate as the Pope, Clement II.
2 minutes more, Father. Sorry.
Okay. King Philip IV of France directed the courts of the Council of Vienna in 1311-1312 with a view to suppress the Templars. During the rise of papacy, except for 2 women rulers, Empress Pulcheria and Empress Irene, both from the Eastern Church, the women were generally kept away from the synods. The initiative taken to convoke the council or synod by laity could become a stimulus in furthering the discussion on granting a constructive role to laity in synod and other ecclesial fora. Dissenting voices were heard at the synods and councils in the early church. The so-called heretics, the schismatics, in the ancient epoch, like Arius or Nestorius, were given a chance to defend themselves in the councils. Even Martin Luther was given a chance to express his views at the Diet of Worms in 1521, where the bishops were also present. An in-depth analysis of synods and councils from the 6th to 14th centuries would indicate that the deliberations had a unique purpose of returning to the source, namely the Word of God and tradition of the Church. This is a journey together, and therefore synods are the ways in which we can express the joy of journeying together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Father. We give a big clap to Father. Thank you so much. The implication is Pope Gregory VII's statement, I loved peace and justice, I die in exile. That's what Father was trying to explain. The implication is, I loved peace and justice, but I die in exile. There was a course introduced in one of the seminaries about the prison ministry. The animator took the students to a jail and requested the jail warden to teach something. The jail warden said, hey, come on, why to teach them? Let's put all of them in a cell, each one in one cell. And all the prisoners were brought out, and the police people were surrounding them. Things have happened. And all these people were inside. All these people were inside, one in one cell, each cell one. And I was one among them. So after returning, after 2 hours, he unlocked and let everybody outside. This was the statement of the jailer. You need no lessons, but practically you understood. Now, I invite Father Francis Tonipara, the CMI priest. A little introduction. Father also was a student of Gregorian University, Rome. He did his licentiate and doctorate in church history. He also holds a diploma in archival sciences from the Vatican. He teaches church history and allied subjects in the Dharmaram Vidya Kshetra, Bengaluru, and other colleges and theological centers. He authored and edited 14 books, published more than 80 scientific articles in journals. In 2019, Pope Francis nominated him as the member of the Pontifical Committee for Historical Sciences, Holy See, Vatican, for the period of 5 years. Having said a little introduction about Father, now I invite Father Francis Tinopara for giving a talk on synodality among the Thomas Christian churches and the challenges today. We give a big clap to.
Respected moderator Dr. Manikyam Susai and my dear friends, good morning to one and all. I thank the moderator for the words of welcome and congratulations to the organizers, and thanks to Dr. Anthony Lawrence and team for having invited me to present the paper. The topic I am going to deal with is synodality among the St. Thomas Christian churches and the challenges today. I am coming to the practical side. We heard from fathers, we heard from history, from Bible, now we come to the practical side. How a church live a synodal life. Not a perfect synodal life, but some synodality was there. The scope of the present paper is to introduce the synodal practices of the St. Thomas Christian churches, and the challenges these churches face today to be faithful to the synodal character, which was very dear to the church during the pre-Constantine period. In course of history, these St. Thomas Christians who trace their origin back to Apostle Thomas came into contact with the Persian church, and also they got divided after the Cross Oath of 1653. And now the churches there are 8 churches holding the tradition of Apostle Thomas. 2 are Catholics, the rest are non-Catholics. Mr. Reverend Johnson is here representing the Jacobite Church. He is doing his doctorate in UTC. I hope he will help me when I speak about the Orthodox Church and their synodality. And these churches include, other than the Syro-Malabar and Malankara, they are the Orthodox Syrian Church, Malankara Jacobite Syrian Orthodox Church, Malabar Independent Syrian Church or Todiur Church, Assyrian Church of the East, Marthoma Syrian Church, St. Thomas Evangelical Church of India, Malankara Syrian Canaanite Church, and a small group of CSI, members of CSI. All these churches share a common history, as I have mentioned, till the Cross Oath in 1653. And these churches and the history of this church shows that the Christians of India, these Christians present a unique way of Christian living, deeply rooted in the Indian soil and free from the influence of the Roman imperial administrative systems. These Christians developed a church administration, a system which was very participatory and is a model for a synodal church. Now these churches practice this synodality in various ways. Intensity varies from church to church. What are the main features of this synodal church? The traditional head of the metropolitan was the metropolitan and the gate of all India, who was the spiritual leader of the community, coming from Persia. And the last Persian bishop was Mar Ibrahim, who died in 1597. Then the effective administration of the community was in the hands of the archdeacon, who was a native priest. He is called the Jadik Kartavyan, or the head of the community. And together with the archdeacon, the yogams at different levels, they did their administration, church administration. And the yogam is the key word when we analyze the synodal character of the St. Thomas Christian tradition. Yogam in the strict sense means assembly, meeting and association. St. Thomas Christian yogams are similar to the Hindu temple yogams, a form of ancient village self-governance. Mandram is the Dravidian equivalent of the Sanskrit word yogam. The power of the governance continued to be exercised mostly by the archdeacon and yogam without much written rule till 1599. During the Latin regime, the archdiaconate was suppressed and abolished many powers of yogam. Yogam survived in a better way among the Jacobites and the Orthodox. The sum total of their Christian life may be summarized in the famous expression, Law of Thomas, Thomaide Margam, or Marthoma Margam, way of Thomas. The main confrontation between the Western missionaries and the native Christians was they misunderstood this law of Thomas, Marthoma Margam, as different from law of Peter. Pluralistic ecclesiology was very much lacking those days. Yogam was a three-tier institution based on the parish, Palli Yogam or Idavaga Yogam, the region, Deshiya Yogam or Pradeshiya Yogam, and the whole nation or community, Mahayogam or Sapayogam or Podu Yogam. Missionaries, especially Bartholomew, Paulinus of Bartholomew, describe these Christians observing this synodal structure, describing these Christians as a Christian republic. Palli Yogam had male representatives from all families presided over by the senior priests. Besides the power of daily administration, it had the power of settling judicial disputes and punishing the guilty with the fines or other penalties, not excluding excommunication or ostracism. Eventually, Palli Yogam was much clericalized, and efforts are underway in restoring the original spirit of Palli Yogam. The priests going to be ordained they have to get a deshakuri or a non-obstruction certificate from the Palli Yogam to be ordained validly. Even today that practice is being followed. Then we have the Deshiya Yogam. Matters affecting several parishes of a region were handled in a Deshiya Yogam consisting of the representatives of these parishes. Deshiya Yogam merged with the diocesan synod and was gradually replaced by the latter, popularly now known as the eparchial assembly. Now we come to the Mahayogam. Matters affecting the whole St. Thomas Christian community were dealt with in the Mahayogam, convoked by the archdeacon. Mahayogam at Edapalli, Angamali are famous. In 1787, 84 representatives from 84 churches assembled in Angamali, and they drafted a document that is known as the Angamali Padiola. Very famous document criticizing the missionaries and demanding for a self-rule or the indigenous rule, etc., etc. Now we come to, there are 5 examples I present before you, if time permits. Then 2 are from the Catholic side, Serum Malabar and Serum Malankara, 3 from the non-Catholic communities. So when I say Yogam and the synodal structure, don't think that it was a perfect model. I never want to make such a claim. There were defects. The early church Yogams, women were not there. The Pramanis of the community dominated very often. That is true. But at the same time, the participatory nature, the Synod of Diamper, there were some 813 participants were there. Out of that, 650 were lay people. That was the involvement of the lay people. Even we have examples like Tachil Mathu Taragan, who collected money and he sold his own property to send Kariyatil and Paramakal to Rome for the unity of to achieve the unity of the church. So coming to the Serum Malabar Church, on December 16, 1992, Serum Malabar Church was raised to the status of a major archiepiscopal church with a synodal structure. So then now we can say that we have the Mahayogam, or the Mahayogam is now represented by the major archiepiscopal assembly. And the supreme authority is the Synod of Bishops, that is the ecclesiastical, the highest authority. At the eparchial level, the updated Deshiya Yogam subsists anonymously in certain specialized organs as the pastoral council, and in some we have the eparchial assembly. At the local level, parish Yogam is governed by the new procedure rules. Even today, parish level Palli Yogam is very powerful. Of course, there is also a Pradinidhi Yogam and a coordinator. He coordinates the whole activities. For the shortage of time, I wind up that Syro Malabar section. Now we come to the Syro Malankara Church. And this Syro Malankara Church also is a major archiepiscopal synodal church with synodal character, and the Catholicos, or according to the West Syrian tradition, they follow the title Catholicos, or the major archbishop is the supreme head of the church, the unifying factor of the church. And they too have a three-tier synodal functioning. Parish administration is carried out by Edabaga Pudiyogam, parish assembly, in which each family is represented. And also this is having a committee, and this committee is executing the decisions of the parish assembly. Then also they have the foreign level or the district level representation. Then they have the eparchial assembly, which is to be held once in 5 years. And it is a consultative body consisting of representatives from priests, religious and laity. Then we have the Malankara Catholic Assembly. The Syro Malankara Catholic Assembly, SMCA, is the wider body where the representatives from the whole Malankara Church is selected, which is the updated Mahayogam of the traditional St. Thomas Christians. Now I come to the the Malankara Orthodox Syrian Church and the Jacobite Church and the Marthoma Church. The Malankara Orthodox Syrian Church, you know that there is a split that happened in 1912. Now there are two groups. One is the Malankara Orthodox and the Jacobites. Now I present the Malankara Orthodox, and the Jacobite Church also almost the same practice is being followed. Basic functioning of the church is in accordance with the Constitution of 1934 that regulates the administration. Here also we have the three-tier administration practiced in the Orthodox Church. At the parish level, there is the parish assembly, which elects the parish managing committee. The eligibility to be elected to the parish managing committee is 21 years of age, and its term is for 1 year. Parish assembly is the main governing body. The managing committee is composed of 5 to 15 members, and the office bearers are trustee and the secretary who coordinates the activities of the parish. The president of the parish assembly is elected by the diocesan metropolitan, who need not be the vicar of the parish.
Father, 5 minutes only.
Very good. More than enough. Thank you. And the diocesan level, we have the metropolitan diocesan assembly, we have the diocesan assembly, that is the president is the metropolitan. And the third level is the Malankara Syrian Christian Association, which is composed of the representatives from each parish and vicars. And there it is interesting to note that the majority of them are lay people. And the election of the bishops takes place here. And the bishop candidate has to get majority of more than 50% from each constitution of the laity and the priest. Then only his election is valid. As in the patrology we have heard, the participation of the lay people. And also you remember that the Malankara Jacobite Syrian Orthodox Church, suppose Reverend Johnson will compliment, but because of the shortage of time I could not mention. There also they have this three-level system, and they have the Jacobite Syrian Christian Association. In the same way, the lay people is having upper hand there. So now we come to the Marthoma Church. There also we have a very strong lay representation and democratic system of functioning, and they have the Pradinidhi Mandalam. There we have the 70% of the votes polled for the bishop candidates for a election of the bishop. 70% of the votes polled, and the majority are lay people. Majority are lay people. Now I come to the concluding part. Other churches, of course, Malankara Syrian Canaanite Church, Malabar Independent Assyrian Church, all those churches are there. Almost the same structure they follow. Now I come to the challenges. When we speak about the challenges, I am speaking from the Syro Malabar Church, especially from the Syro Malabar Church. Clericalism is dominant, as Binoy has yesterday mentioned, which undermines the grassroots level functioning of the synodality, and the proper main training is needed in the seminaries to train the seminarians, the future ministers, to be more synodal, to hear the voice of the lay people. Women representation is not properly done, although there are provisions for the proper representation of women. Cross-section of the society is not properly represented in many of the decision-making bodies due to various reasons like indifference, prejudice, etc. Dominance of the influential class, yesterday somebody mentioned, that also is very much here. The Jacobite Church, I doubt, and the Orthodox Church and the Martoma Church, I doubt whether because of the over-dominance of the lay people, they may also have the problem of the manipulation of the whole situation, etc., etc. It's only my apprehension.
Only 2 minutes, Father. Thank you.
Catholic Church is the communion of 24 sui juris churches. We should have a policy of give and take. One typical example in Bangalore is the Latin Church now started in front of their churches, started erecting the flagstaff. That is the tradition of the St. Thomas Christians. One typical example. As Father Felix Wilfred has yesterday mentioned, why can't the Latin Church in India think of a synodal church following the patrimony of the early church of synodality? Thank you very much for your patient listening.
We give a big clap to all the three because they have helped us to keep the timing. So, I'm here to consolidate in 3 statements only. The first one, Father Terence tried to find out or tell us the blueprinters who were the cause. He ended with a statement, slowly the blueprint was missing. And that missing attitude gave an implication by the statement. Father Jesuraj explained how there was a shift. The missing practically put us in a big problem of a little change, and the statement of Gregory the Seventh, who said, I loved peace and justice, I die in exile. And the third one, very practical, how today the things are being kept as a synodal church. But the conclusion of Father Father Francis' paper gives a statement there. There are issues. There are issues. Father has given in the last paragraph. There are issues because of. Depends on the region. A concluding experience. After this lockdown is over, we started going for the BEC or Basic Ecclesial Community meetings and masses. Last week I had been to a Basic Christian Community or the Basic Ecclesial Community mass. After the meeting, there was a senior person who was coughing all the time. In the beginning for 5 minutes. Everybody was scared. Those who were without the mask, they tried to go out of the hall, the room where the mass was arranged. And there was a senior person, another senior person, just switch off the fan, let's see what happens. Switched off the fan, and still she was coughing, and there was another youngster who brought a glass
compared to the Roman system, we have a system. I don't say that that is a model. There is still space for improvement, and I hope that we should go for that. And some churches are doing that. I don't say that Syro Malabar Church I belong. I don't say that we are fully justifiable to the statement I made. I don't say that. I said one example we can have where we heard from the history where 3 popes were removed by Henry III, or I am less than God, more than human beings. Such statements where the spiritual dimension of the spiritual leaders are being minimized. But in our case, of course, we had abuses, corruptions, etc. In our case, the metropolitans were normally, they were looking after the spiritual things, and the temporalities were administered by the archdeacon and other people. What is happening in all the churches of India today? The spiritual heads wanted to have interference in the temporalities. Wherever they intervened, they landed up in controversies. I don't want to explain many more. We can have private discussion when we have time. Thank you very much.
Some of the questions can be given in private. Yeah, Father, as he said, you can ask. Now, Father Chaurappa.
In connection with the question I asked, thank you for the good presentation for the Francis Dan. You see, when we different churches, you accuse the Latin Church, and Latin Church accuses the other churches. So the words you are using is Latin regime. 15th, 16th century, the Portuguese came, Latin regime. I don't think it was a Latin regime for us. Secondly, still the Catholic, the Thomas Christians insist on the hegemony of their origin in Indian church history, saying that we have this and we had this. So in the recent Shamshabad appointment, there was the hierarchy wanted to have a bishop of Indian jurisdiction. And also you were referring to give and take, but that does not happen. And whenever there is a pope uses the word give and take, you use the word sui juris. So give a better explanation for this.
So thank you for your since we are in Synodal Church, I request the participants to share the questions with other resource persons also.
That's what I also prefer, that the other resource persons also could be interrogated. Thank you.
So that is a term that is, if you study the history of St. Thomas Christians, we use that in inverted commas regime. That I can easily avoid. There is no problem. And coming to the second and the third questions, because even today we have the lack of ecclesiology, proper understanding of ecclesiology. Sui juris churches, 3 individual churches. All India jurisdiction, we already had All India jurisdiction. Our metropolitan was known as Metropolitan and Gate of All India. Archdeacon was known as the Archdeacon of All India. So there is nothing new. A hierarchy was re-established in 1923. There was a hierarchy. May not be a proper hierarchy of the Post-Vatican Council. There was the credit goes to our ancestors because they preserved the faith for 2000 years. Because you may blame caste system and all those things, all are there. I don't say that. Slavery was there. Look at the medieval Europe. Abbots were having wives. Bishops were having wives. We had child bishops. Bishops never had administered his faculty of sacrament. We were dark age of papacy. Even one pope was thrown into river Tiber in 896. So nobody has the right to have any absolute claims. We have our own limitations. He accepts that. Thank you very much.
Just one small interference.
Just a last question because we have only 1 minute left. I don't
Yeah.
want to exceed the timing. Father Chaurappa, I don't want to exceed the timing because the chairperson, Father Lawrence, has already warned us. Tomorrow we may not get the people back here. So if you have any questions, please ask with the presenters after. Just a last question for which I ask Father, anybody whom you are addressing, I received all the papers that has been distributed to the people with regard to the questionnaire. They have written yes or no. That's the way that I request the paper presenters to give the answer because 1 minute only.
Good morning, Father. This is a question for Dr. Francis. I'm sorry, I'm not putting into too much of controversy, but I was believed that I was a Catholic. As I grew up, I realized that we have, coming from Kerala, you're not just a Catholic, but you needed to belong to one of the Syro, Malabar, Malankara, and multiple rites. Today, I'm on a crossroad wherein, being a Catholic, I need to get permission from such a church for such a event. Could you explain, Father, when we are talking about being synodal between the religion, why do we have so much of denominations? Can't we just be one? My father was in the armed forces for 2 wars. We only had one religion, a Christian. That's it, my father.
Thank you. So I have to intervene because 8 eyes are on me now. From the podium, 8 eyes are on me. Now the last and the final statement is the church is synodal even today. Even though there are issues to be tackled with. And the Cyprian statement goes, if there is love as it is among the Trinity, and if it is touching the internal aspect or the internal spirit of the people, the church would rise up and certainly will find out the blueprint of the Catholic Church, one Holy Mother Catholic Church. I wind up. Thank you so much.
We have come to the close of the first session of the second day of the National Seminar. May I thank Reverend Dr. Manikyam Susai for having done his work in an excellent manner. I also thank the presenters of the day, Reverend Dr. Xavier Terence, Dr. Jesuraj Rayapan, Dr. Francis Thonipara, CMI, for their scholarly and insightful papers and the attractive presentation of the same. May I call upon Sister Vimala Rossi SMMI, a former student of the Department of Missiology, to hand over the gift as a token of our gratitude to the moderator and the resource persons. Before we disperse for the coffee break, I have an announcement from the parallel sessions desk. There are parallel sessions in the afternoon from 2:30 p.m. to 4 p.m. You are requested to mark your name for the parallel sessions. The parallel session desk is at the reception. Parallel sessions are arranged at 4 different venues. First venue, the auditorium, this hall. Second, the library hall. Third, the conference hall. And fourth, the third year theology classroom. For the directions of the venue, you may please follow the signboard fixed outside. Now we shall disperse for the coffee, and I request all of you to be back in this auditorium sharp at 11 a.m. Thank you.
Some of the questions can be given in private. Yeah, Father, as he said, you can ask. Now, Father Chaurappa.
In connection with the question asked, thank you for the good presentation for the Francis Dan. You see, when we different churches, you accuse the Latin Church, and Latin Church accuses the other churches. So the words you are using is Latin regime. 15th, 16th century, the Portuguese came, Latin regime. I don't think it was a Latin regime for us. Secondly, still the Catholic, the Thomas Christians insist on the hegemony of their origin in Indian church history, saying that we have this and we had this. So in the recent Shamshabad appointment, there was the hierarchy wanted to have a bishop of Indian jurisdiction. And also you were referring to give and take. But that does not happen. And whenever there is a pope uses the word give and take, you use the word sui juris. So give a better explanation for this.
So thank you for your since we are in Synodal Church, I request the participants to share the questions with other resource persons also.
That's what I also prefer, that the other resource persons also could be interrogated. Thank you.
So that is a term that is, if you study the history of St. Thomas Christians, we use that in inverted commas regime. That I can easily avoid, there is no problem. I'm coming to the second and the third questions, because even today we have the lack of ecclesiology, proper understanding of ecclesiology. Sui juris churches, 3 individual churches. All India jurisdiction, we already had All India jurisdiction. Our metropolitan was known as Metropolitan and Gate of All India. Archdeacon was known as the Archdeacon of All India. So there is nothing new.